Hello, folks.
Hello.
How are you all? We will we will get started in the next couple minutes. We like to usually takes a couple minutes for folks to join. In our agenda for today, where is it? Here we are. And feel free to add your name there if you want. I'll put myself in. Hey, folks. Hi, Karina. Hey, Dave. We're just all gathering. Give it another minute. Hey, Robert.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
You can't unmute. Is anyone else having trouble unmuting? Make sure that sometimes I've had like a little pop-up on the screen that I don't notice, and it prevents me from doing anything else.
Oh, that's a good call. It was the it's being recorded pop-up. Thank you.
Yeah, that happened to me one time. I was totally lost. Yeah, we'll give it, let's say one more minute. We're pretty close to critical mass here, so. I'll share the notes one more time. Here's the notes in the agenda. I don't know if you can see I posted it before. You can add your name in there if you want. All right, so why don't we, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, we like to start off, everybody to 2024 and to the platforms working group. Our first meeting of 2024, which by the way, I saw the thread. I need to add we need to add the invites for 2024 series. We like to get started by welcoming folks, new faces, and giving an opportunity for the first 2 or 3 minutes here for people to introduce themselves and let us know kind of your interests, so we can defer to you as things come up. So if you're new, put your name in the notes so we know who you are, and please come off mute and introduce yourself for take 30 seconds if you could.
Hey everyone, this is Ecem. I'm working in Accenture UK. I'm I'm DevOps lead and part of platforms group. So essentially, I've been following this for a while, and I want to join and observe, learn, and contribute to the platform as product maturity interview framework. Yeah, thank you. That's all from me.
Welcome.
Hey guys, happy to be here. My name is Map Shen, running the platform team at Stratic right now. And first time joining this meeting and looking forward to getting to know you guys better.
Cool, thank you.
I think I can go next. I'm Giovanni. I'm a site reliability engineer, and we always overlap with platform. So I'm here to learn more and try to participate as much as I can. I'm based in Brazil, by the way.
Oh, Do you want to review the Portuguese translation for us?
That was mine actually.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I was just looking for a second person to help you out there. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Alexei July. I'm co-head of cloud engineering at EPAM Systems, and my primary focus is containerization and platform engineering. And my purpose is to, to align with the latest trends and correlate with our practices in EPAM. Thank you, guys. Nice to meet.
My name is Chris. I actually work with Dave Williams at MassDriver, and our first meeting, and interested in seeing some of the discussion and standards around platform as a product.
I'm Dave, by the way.
Hey, Dave. I guess you guys will get a little more chance when you go in a few minutes. Okay, I think that's anyone else. I think that's I think we've about covered it. Welcome to everybody who joined us. We were going through that, and yeah, and Happy New Year 2024. First thing on the agenda is we did start in the last weeks of 2023 a couple interviews around the platform as product research that we're doing. We don't have Michael here today. I was in the first one. I wasn't in the second one. I guess I wanted to the links to all of the docs that we've been using are in the notes. We've been using this interview framework, which is the first thing there, and that kind of outlines our goals. The first page or so of that document says, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what and it includes a script for the interviews. Following that, still looking at the notes here, we have the notes from the first two interviews. Tried to somewhat anonymize them, but the second one is a little not so anonymous. I didn't change any of the notes. I just put them into here. And then the last thing that I put in, based on Colin Griffin. Colin, thank you for going through the first interview and kind of cleaning it up and making it a little easier to read. And one thing I was thinking is maybe we can learn from that and leverage, just give people this interview template for the future. And that might help us. Because one thing I noticed, and I'm going to shut up in a second and let other people give their feedback, but I did notice that the notes for the first interview and for the second were really different. So, just was trying to maybe seek some consistency there with the template. So yeah, let me be quiet. What do people think of those first couple of interviews? What could we do better? I think our next steps are to share this out and let other people conduct interviews. Yeah, thoughts?
I mean, because you already said it, the way on how we document the notes throughout the interviews was quite different. One interesting aspect, because you said you were not for the second interview. At least we managed to get through all of the questions in the second time, which we couldn't manage in the first time. So one progress at least on that side. And in the second time, you did a really great job, Josh, in the first time, and while we had the interview and writing down the notes already. That was really, really nice. In the second time, Michael used the transcript of the meeting as the base of all of the information, and I guess he has to put in a bit more effort now to summarize a bit of that transcript, or leverage Gen AI or something to create a compelling summary out of that huge text. But at least now you still have the opportunity to read through the whole transcript of the meeting.
Do you think we should always keep a transcript?
I mean, we still have the open question also with the you know, with the videos that we recorded on how can we share this information as anonymized as possible. I think having the transcript as a like detailed view on here's the whole talk is an interesting artifact. How it can be done with, you know, abiding to data protection and all that is something different. And I also expect that not a lot of people will read through the whole transcript because it's an hour full of talking, right?
Yeah, we got to think about how we're going to collect this up eventually, because yeah, not everyone's going to read it. Hey, David, yeah, let you talk.
So I was in the first one, not the second one, but one of the things we might want to do is we've got a standardized template, but maybe we also have to identify questions that are more critical to have answered than others to make sure that like you get through the important parts of the script before you say, oh, we have some more time, we can talk about other stuff. But you know, it'll be like, for instance, we didn't talk about organizational size in the first and layout in the first interview. And I think, you know, that'll be an important point of comparison between the different interviews, from my perspective, at least. But we should all agree on which ones are the sort of critical comparison points, and then make sure they're always there. And then, you know, there's an hour's worth of text to kind of pull that out of, but if we ask explicitly on a bunch of things.
Yeah, I wonder if we can maybe edit up the template a little and add some highlighting to the key questions to make sure that, hey, even if you have to speed up and skip some, don't skip these.
Yep.
I wonder, would you feel comfortable, David, like where should we comment? In the original doc or in this template?
I think the template would probably be the place, because that's our working area right now.
Yeah, that can become our.
And we can always pull it back to what we would do is comment there, and eventually we need to go back to the original document, which is like the methods, right, for the whole process.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Like eventually I'm going to go back and read the original hypotheses to kind of
Yep.
craft our conclusions. Saeem, what's up?
Hi Josh, Happy New Year everyone. It's the first meeting of 2024. Glad to see Josh and everyone. So Josh, I'm thinking because I did attended the second interview with Michael, and I was working with Michael on the one-on-one. Like, we need to get out the summary. Like, we are interviewing some participant, and we need to might having some charts info, some graphical info, like what we ask, what his answer was, how many of the question around IDPs, or how many of the question around organizational, let's say, challenges, or in the building the platform team. So we might bring in some chart info into that, because I'm thinking when we put out this information, the final doc, we have some kind of these charts and some bars and some graphical info where we tell people like why we interview this candidate, why we pick these 5 individuals, why we're asking these questions, what was the motivation behind these questions. So I'm thinking, I'm setting up this time with Michael, like we have some sort of template for every interview. We have some summary, the summary of the points, and then we actually orchestrate the flow considering the Paris is closer. So what the info will be at the end of the day be providing in KubeCon Paris. So I think like right now we have 2 different docs for the interview section, and when we have the template main doc. So I think it's kind of organization. So every interview we have a separate doc. So I think we at the end of the day, we have some one collaborative doc for all of the interviews and we all of the summaries. And then we have to critically debates on why we actually interview and ask these questions.
I kind of heard 2 things there. One, we should, like, in our final report, we should clarify why we asked all those questions. And two, you're kind of suggesting, Saeem, that we do summaries for each call somehow with key metrics, and I don't know, am I getting that
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Because yes, absolutely. I think for having a very small paragraph of every interview, and we might put a one combined doc for all of the interview and name of the candidate, and with a very prescriptive information of what he asked, what our question was, and a very brief summary. At the end of the day, this really helps coordinating the data into the final output, into the final doc. Else we have to carefully read everyone, what was their script, and it's taking a lot of time.
I hear that. Yeah. I guess that's something, let's try to, I mean, if people want to try to do that. And that's a good segue, Saeem, into the next thing. So like, I think what our goal with this whole thing has been to enable others to basically be able to give this interview template to everybody in this call and let you interview your colleagues, or, you know, somebody that runs a platform that you know, or us interview some of you. I don't know, whatever, however we want to do it. So I guess, yeah.
I'm actually going to use it as sorry, I'm really sick, as the framework to interview the person that I'm co-speaking with in Paris. It's like, I'm going to collect, because he's the stakeholder for our platform. So I'm going to interview him and then use that content to create our presentation.
That's amazing. Do you need a backup, a note taker or
Yeah,
something?
I will share that if anybody wants to join.
Yeah. So yeah, what I was gonna say, Same, is maybe we experiment. You know, that is a good idea. I don't know how much every interviewer is gonna want to write it, but if somebody wants to take a stab at it, for one of the ones we do. Hey, Abby.
Or might we can create a template with all of the people who wanted to create, like, it's basically a template for us for adding the info for the interview, and
see.
what portion is actually beneficial for us, and which portion that the interviewee will add his input, and then we all use the same template, whichever is interviewing or whichever going to the conferences, and that would be, I think, good way to move forward.
I think I see what you're saying. Like, we could add a couple things to the template, like for official use only, where, you know, the interviewer adds their own summary or comments, and we could do it in a consistent way. Okay, I still think, like, let's take a stab at it, you know, MVP style, and then we'll add it to that template.
I think this is where the one thing I would recommend is that whole monitoring observability thing, which might land well with this crowd, which is like, if we predetermined what our aggregate data is, and it turns out we wish we had captured something different, we'll be in trouble. So to Marcia's point in the chat, I think taking advantage of the like freshness of the information to try and consolidate into our best possible template on hand today makes a ton of sense. Anything where we try and pre-aggregate the data right now based on pretty limited experience to date, like we're doing a great job of starting to nail in on what good looks like, but we're still only 2 interviews in. So I think anything where we start with kind of pre-aggregating that data now, I think we'll kick ourselves a little bit about losing some of the context. So that's all. It's just making sure that we don't run too quickly towards a template of aggregate stuff while we're still learning what good looks like. So the other thing I rose my hand for mostly was just to say, I'd love to make sure that we wrap up this conversation and making it clear how people can get involved. I can see a few faces and names here, and I have a few more of people that have pinged me privately that I've encouraged to come to these things who are looking to get involved in this specific project. And I've heard some really awesome points, but I don't know if I was a newcomer, if I would feel comfortable jumping into any of the things mentioned to date or like so far on the call. And so if we can, even if it means something after this call, getting a post out on Slack with action items that people can sign up to or join in on or whatever, I just think trying to be actionable about getting new faces involved would be awesome. So that is all.
Yeah, maybe it helped to have those public calls. Maybe, I don't know, I'm asking. Like, in other words, I'm thinking, Brian, if we can do it and let other people join, if you're open to that, like people that are
Yeah.
open to an open interview might help others like see how it's done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, this client relationship is public, and he wants to go to conferences and talk about what we've done. So all good.
perfect. I do want to be conscious of time. It's 10:20, and Dave and Chris were going to talk to us about MassDriver, but we do have a couple of hands up. So David, I think you were first.
Just quickly, I'm gonna do the typical techie solutioning thing. I've been working a lot with Markdown and finally found my dream tool, which is the ability to SQL query over Markdown and put schemas on Markdown and such. So I'm wondering, depending on how many of these things we have, if we take the Google Doc, transcribe into Markdown so that we can also keep it in Git, but then also do things with it. And I can, take a look at how to do that. I've been doing a lot with it lately. So
That would be super cool. Imagine you could make a form so that people could just fill it out with the answers.
yeah, there's all sorts of ways of doing it. The only other thing I said, we were looking at tools for running some of this as well. So I don't know if anything happened with that. It would probably be better than handcrafting stuff.
Nothing did happen with that, but that is a good call out. I'll put it on my notes to at least bump the thread with
Yeah.
CNCF.
Yeah, I'm aware of that too. Josh, since I was helping you with some of the formatting, a lot of that hierarchy, like doing the text hierarchy matches to using Markdown, right? Header 1, header 2, and all that stuff. But adding some front matter would probably be nice, but that's something I could probably help you with also. So I echo a little bit of what David says there. I had my hand up for another thing though, really quickly. My thought as we were talking was, is there a thought or feeling about maybe as part of the KubeCon content or the booth content, including some interviews at the booth in lieu of some of the lightning talks? I think it would be really cool and interesting to kind of have a little panel talk or panel interview thing happen where we're interviewing one or like have 3 different interviews of a product owner or team or something like that. Let 2 or 3 people interview, transcribe and all that stuff. That could serve as an example for how to interview also.
Yeah, that's a good
idea.
Maybe we'll bring it up with the folks that are setting up our KubeCon Paris booth. Okay, I think that was some good feedback, and there's some actions for us to take, especially in refining the interview template. Looking forward to Brian yours, and let's work on that as the next official one. I think I'm about ready to pursue one that I've got also soon. So I'll let you all know.
I'm gonna wait until I'm feeling a little better because my voice is awful. But we can give it a few days. Yeah.
No problem. Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, let's go ahead and now shift over. Abby, do you want to introduce Dave and Chris? I know you guys were talking. Or
anything connects me to cool people like them, sure. Yeah, no, I've had some chats with both of them, and specifically more with a bit with Dave around what it looks like to do platform engineering more standardized or more kind of accessible across tooling. Because I think right now there's a lot of like vendor specific solutions, and you can see vendor agnostic solutions in some of the application spaces and like the API spaces, but what does that look like for platform orchestration or platform tooling? And they have some really cool ideas around what that might look like. So I just want to encourage them to share it wider and get more feedback and get more people engaged. So that's, yeah, I'm just cool by proxy. Let them take it away.
What's everybody doing today? Thank you very much for that, Abby. Dan, thanks for letting us come in and kind of show you some stuff. I have just like a quick slide deck that I can share to get everybody kind of up to speed, and then I'd love feedback, criticism, whatever. Let me share a screen. Can everybody see that? I'm seeing some head nods. Awesome. So Chris and I are at MassDriver, and we built MassDriver because we came from operations, and we had a problem in operations, which was the huge training gap in like delivering self-service. Right, you can teach people to write Terraform and paste your modules and do all that fun stuff, but the training very rarely sticks. It's not something that people do every day the same way they kind of use their programming languages and their kind of like day-to-day CI tooling and things like that. And so our problem was figuring out how to enable developer self-service and minimize training as much as humanly possible. And this led us to this kind of golden block spec. And the purpose of the golden block spec is to kind of treat the cloud applications and infrastructure as Lego blocks, enabling your organization to build novel architectures without having to like modify Terraform scripts, or like learn several different tools like Helm, Terraform, and Pulumi, right? Your operations and security professionals are building these Lego blocks that are compliant and secure, and developers grab them as they need them and kind of move forward, right? This solves some of the entropy problem that like golden paths have. Golden paths are great to get started, but entropy becomes a nightmare, especially in a world of like CQRS and event-driven systems and distributed systems. There's a lot of like ownership questions, right? And so that's kind of where MassDriver starts. So if we look at an example of something that like we would build as an operations professional, we look at like SQS. It's very rarely that an SQS queue is an SQS queue, right? At MassDriver, if you use our SQS queue, you get a dead letter queue. You have to because redundancy is important, right? IAM policies that are least privilege, right? That's kind of non-negotiable for most organizations. Security is non-negotiable, right? Default alarms, limiting like the overhead of understanding, monitoring these things. When we build our SQS blocks, we say like dead letter queues. If there's a message in there, you need to go look at it, right? And then like policy attachments for kind of the inner workings, right? Like being able to publish a message from SQS to the dead letter queue, right? Like all this stuff is kind of overhead. And we do this in modules today using Terraform, right? We build in these best practices and make people copy paste. But we have a problem, which is like the interfaces to a lot of this tooling is like, it's an expert interface. You need to know what you're doing. There's not a ton of validation pre-runtime. Like you just need to know, right? And you need to read some documentation. So we've created kind of our golden block spec to handle some of this, right? And there's three main parts of a golden block, right? The first thing is what we call a param schema. Now, this is intended to capture user input. This is stuff that like you can't determine ahead of time, right? We use JSON schema for this, right? And so now, no matter what the underlying tooling is, whether it's Helm, Pulumi, Terraform, CloudFormation, the user sees the exact same interface every single time, right? This is great because like every engineer in your organization has the same experience, which means they can kind of share their learnings and things like that. And then you have all the cool stuff from JSON schema, right? Enums, maybe you want to limit regions in your organization, right? You can now say like, cool, every region form field has the 3 approved regions we deploy in, right? Now, developers don't need to know that. You can do cool things like, size conversion and stuff like that. So people can think in megabytes or gigs or whatever they want to think in, right? And this just makes it so like you're building your documentation into your interfaces, right? Rich descriptions, all this good stuff comes out of this. Next, we have an artifact schema. All this is structured output saying, I built a thing, and here's the stuff you need to know about it, right? So like, what's the ARN of our SQS queue? We've created policies in that block that we can attach, right? We have read, write, and read and write. Like, allow downstreams to understand, like, hey, this is kind of how you connect to this thing. This is how you secure it. Yada, 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 right? There are specs here, which are basically like metadata fields. So maybe you want to put constraints on something like, in order to deploy a database in our organization, we require a VPC with private subnets because we don't put databases in public subnets, right? Just gives everybody in your organization access to everything you've created, right? That creates that kind of like Lego blocks thing.
Is that artifact schema kind of like a status? Is it like read only?
It is write on runtime and then read only for everybody else. So every time you run one of these blocks, we create that artifact and we go, this is the current state of it, and then your downstreams consume that and do what they need to do with it.
In my head, I kind of saw like the first part was the spec and that second part was the status. So I'm relating it to Kubernetes API.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely think about it as the status, right? This is kind of our solution to like the pains of like Terraform remote state. Instead of having some thing somewhere in an S3 bucket or on somebody's laptop, now we have like this concrete thing, and we say like this is the result of running a piece of infrastructure or an application, right? And then the last piece of this, which actually makes the line, is what we call a connection schema. And that's a way of defining dependencies. So you can say as a database, I need a network and a something else, and I need the constraint of private subnets, right? The cool thing when you start working in this, and if you go play with MassDriver at all, I think Michael Levin found it in the video he posted. You can actually like drag an application on and have it build infrastructure backwards, right? Because we have a type system, we can actually work out what all the dependencies were. And now engineers can kind of start from wherever they're comfortable, whether that's an application or something else. So in-flight features to support this. We also have two other things. So my big premise about platform engineering is like you really require two things: a catalog of stuff you can deploy, and an inventory of stuff that has been deployed so that deployed resources can talk to each other, right? So metadata block is something we're building into this, which is basically like a way of saying like this block represents a NoSQL database. And now your end users can go in and say, what NoSQL databases do I have available to me, right? I've entered a lot of organizations. Answering that question is almost always impossible, right? You have to go talk to people. You can't just search something. You don't have kind of this catalog system, right? And then, you know, we ran into a couple of issues where things like EKS require two different provisioning systems, right? Terraform probably, CloudFormation probably, and then definitely Helm to get all your kind of dependencies in, right? So we're coming up with a steps model to allow you to run two different pieces of tooling in one single block. So now engineers don't have to think about any of that stuff, right? And then finally, we have some supporting tooling that we're working on. All of this, again, we're trying to do in the open source. This is stuff that, quite frankly, we never want to make money on. We want this problem solved because if our business fails, we want to go into organizations that are doing things well. So we want this to be in the public, and we want people to use it. So four big pieces of work on our plate right now that we would love contributions on. The first is Airlock. So this is a tool to convert the JSON schemas to like the native languages of this tooling. So you could think like JSON schema to TF vars files, and then validation of incoming JSON, right? So all of your tooling speaks JSON now. We're working on Gov, which is like a secure storage mechanism for artifacts, allowing you to kind of atomically share these artifacts between things. So now you're kind of sharing secrets, you're sharing things like what are they called? Like subnets and all that fun stuff that you need to like deploy something into a VPC. You can do this kind of securely in the back without engineers copy pasting anything. And then we're looking to kind of standardize our provisioner for these golden blocks. So we reuse our pipelines. We don't write new pipelines. We have one Terraform pipeline that we send these blocks through. We have one CloudFormation pipeline that we send these blocks through. So standardizing this allows us to kind of expand the tooling offering and allow people to do things like you could have a bash provisioner where your kind of golden block has bash in the middle, right? And then finally, go ahead, sorry.
Is that provisioner kind of like an operator or a controller that actually does the work? Is that like the core piece there?
Yeah. It's generally some scheduled container. We try and kind of keep it as broad as that. We use like Argo workflows to run ours to trigger them, but theoretically the goal is like you should be able to put this in a GitHub action if you wanted to and have it work.
Thanks.
And then finally, we're working on a VS Code plugin to allow you to kind of edit all those schemas, test them in your editor, create provisioners, and kind of deploy locally to kind of support that golden block tooling. And that should give you kind of the 360 view of being able to like run all of this stuff with the golden block spec. So
how do you connect? How do you help the blocks connect to each other? Like, you got to have secrets and URLs and things passed between two different blocks. Let's say SQSQ needs to be able to talk to an S3 bucket. I don't know, or to your app. Your app has to, you know, authenticate. How do you get that secret stuff transferred? Do you handle that?
yeah, so when you define that kind of that connection schema and those dependencies, in MassDriver, you draw a line, right? I could see it being a series of drop downs or something like that, right? But like you select the artifact. So without ever seeing the data of that artifact, you're like, oh, I need the ecom production database artifact. And behind the scenes with our artifact sharing utility, we inject those in when we run the provisioning, right? So now users are just saying like, I need to connect to that database. They're not going to find the username and password of the database somewhere.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
Pleasure. David, I see a hand up.
So is this independent of Kubernetes? You said something about running in a GitHub action, for instance. What's the is there an implied infrastructure necessary for like these dependent, like, you know, for anything more complex than just rendering JSON into like, you know, a backend format? Is there like a state system somewhere for this?
So Gov would be the state system for artifacts, but one of the things that I think we've tried to kind of separate is like how you kind of run your infrastructure and applications, right? How you deploy them, right? And how you aggregate that data to like make a platform, right? Should be kind of two separate things. And we really wanted to focus on with this was like the ability to have a tooling agnostic format for the creation of platforms. So you could run all of this on Kubernetes. You could run it in Heroku. You could run it wherever you want. And I think like that's up to you. We want to create something that's really, really flexible and kind of supports platform engineering teams and building what they need to build.
And just a comment on that is how. So I've seen this a number of times, and one of the big complaints is always you're getting away. You're trying to abstract something that everyone's already comfortable with. Maybe not developers, right? Because we're trying to serve a different, you know, a different group. But a lot of platform teams complain, why do I have to work through this thing? It's sort of like when you ask developers to do behavior-driven tests, and they're like, all right, I can't just write unit tests. Now I have to write another thing, and then, you know. So is there the potential for some disconnect in terms of the amount of effort involved for platform engineers versus the benefit it gives the developers? I don't think a lot of platform engineers see that, right? They just want to create Terraform modules and say, just use this stuff. And one of the other solutions I've seen is like using JSON schema, but essentially interpolating like a Terraform or a you know, another JSON format, and just disallowing parts of it and expanding it, you know, like say a CloudFormation, until all the backend stuff kind of gets added to it without necessarily having a different format to work with. And you would use, you know, you don't get a universal format for all of these different platforms, but those are very difficult to make work, right? It puts more and more stress on the backend developer to say, I'm going to abstract a queue completely, as opposed to an SQSQ that's specific to AWS.
Yeah, I mean, I question whether or not abstracting a queue is the solution, right? Like, just in general, right? I feel like that generally makes it like even abstracting SQS into a universal module. Like if you look at AWS's Terraform registry, VPCs require more inputs than there are inputs on the individual resources, right? Like this is what happens when you try and create universal abstraction. So like for me, blocks are supposed to be specific as humanly possible and intention-based, right? Thinking about how a developer might think about using something, right? FIFO queue and non-FIFO queue may be too pedantic, right? That's probably a checkbox. But figuring out kind of like, I could see having like a high write, low read queue, right? Where like you've tuned your alarms differently, right? And that's like easy for a developer to understand the abstraction, right? They still have some amount of control, and I think that's good. Yeah, I mean, so does that answer that kind of question?
It sort of answers the question. I guess part of it also comes down to is how much this is meant to capture local opinions versus what a lot of platform tool sets are, which is we've got this standardized way of accessing, SQS queues or provisioning them through our system. And then you're kind of trapped with the way that they do things. And usually, like any of these resources need to be customized and used for a local organization. So like that level of work, how do you make a certain amount of a library available, but then make it customizable for the local platform teams? Because if there's an intermediate format like this, but not much of the implementation, then you're saying that a platform team, this is the interface for your users, but the interface for you to the platform is you're going to have to, essentially write all of this.
Yeah, I think addressing that, right? So I've been involved in DevOps for the last like 10-ish years, right? In some capacity or another. I've been using Terraform for a very, very long time. And I think like in recent years, I've seen that kind of like shift left mentality. The current tooling doesn't help us do that, right? Finding these standards and creating like infrastructure as software, I think is like the key to truly shifting left, right? Formalizing how a business, how an organization runs infrastructure, codifying that, and then making that available as a feature is probably the way to shift left truly, right? So I think like we may be comfortable with Terraform, we may be comfortable with the way we're doing it, but we need better validation up front. I think we need better management of kind of like these artifacts, right? Understanding what we've created and being able to tie it together securely. And I think like at the end of the day, the extra overhead provides you a lot of facility, right? And now you can start to focus on the software of your platform using these kind of abstractions, right? And like as platform engineers, we should be, I think, personally, more interested in the creation of good software that delivers self-service than we should be about the kind of underlying tooling here. And I think like something as flexible as this fits into anybody's kind of idea of what a platform is, right? Like you can render JSON schema using bubble T or something in a Go CLI and kind of utilize all this stuff, like if you really wanted to. So I like that's kind of our goal is like, let's figure out how to codify what it means to run a piece of infrastructure. Let's create a standard interface around it. And then let's focus on like building great software to like deliver this stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think what's interesting about this to me when I was just hearing about it in the first place and now is that we have all sorts of tools out there like Docker Compose and Acorn and Radius and a bunch of others that are all trying to codify the like what does a like concrete what does an application need, and it's like these are the fields, we have defined these fields, and then there's what I like about this pattern is that it's not trying to say what are these fields, it's trying to say what are the categories of fields, because you do need to be able to customize to your business. And what I also like about this is that like also resonates with me about this is that that whole point about make good software, like we like I think we're special. I love platform engineers, but like we're not special. Like we've been learning how to write software for decades and decades, and like as the focus on software engineering has moved down the stack, we've become more and more aware of things like version control. First it hit software, and then all of a sudden it came to infrastructure. Then we went to like testing. First it hit software, and then it came to infrastructure. And there was like a decade where it was like, well, infrastructure doesn't get tested, only software does. And now we're past that, I think. And I think that this idea of like an API to drive multiple interfaces, and the point that you made, Dave, right there of like your interface could be a CLI, it could be an API, it could just be the API, or it could be a front end portal that we, there's tons of examples of, like, I think is a really is really clutch to me, in that what we need is a way, as a platform engineer, what we need is a way to be able to provide interfaces which can have a codified implementation in one place, meaning an API, which may be its only interface is the API, or we may create nicer, more customized interfaces for people. And we need a way to be able to then implement that API behind the scenes, right? So an API provides the interface outwards and the implementation backwards. And so yes, like this doesn't provide the implementation, but it provides a structure. And I think where my introduction of Dave was like, this becomes vendor neutral potentially if it meets enough of our requirements as platform engineers and is broad enough, and all of a sudden, just like all like vendors deal with kind of Docker containers or like a container interface, and like there's lots of these interfaces that lots of vendors sit behind and can help you orchestrate. Like OpenTelemetry is probably a really good example here. Lots of vendors now take in OpenTelemetry data and then they put their own little spin on it. Like this is the type of interface where if it catches on and it becomes complete enough and popular enough, you'd find multiple platform oriented vendors who could help you write the backends following this interface. So yeah, so those were the things that I thought was where I think it drives really well towards what we talk about as a group and towards like the open source side of what we talk about as a group. But obviously it's been up until now, like sort of the brainchild of some very experienced and awesome people, but still a limited pool of people. And just like we saw with like the maturity model came out of a small pool of people and got transformed into an amazing document. I think this can happen with this as well if there's passion within the group to work together on that. So yeah, sorry, Josh, I'm done.
No, I wanted to pick up on something you were saying, Abby. I think that like we're seeing this like next level API above, the raw infrastructure APIs. But I wanted to bring up, and I kind of want to ask David if this is maybe what he was getting at. I see some folks are extending the Kubernetes API and reusing the Kubernetes framework to do more software-defined infrastructure. But then there's like Radius and 3-port, and this seems like the provisioners are not Kubernetes. You're creating another layer above Kubernetes. And I just wanted to bring that up. It's almost like there's a bit of a debate, amongst all of us here that are creating this stuff, whether we want to extend Kubernetes and use that as the generic framework or whether we need another layer on top. I don't know, David, if that's what you're
I think
getting.
that, yeah, that is, well, there's two things. A lot of non-software engineering platform teams have always said, well, the API is the file, right? You check the file in, and that was their concept of self-service. But I wouldn't really call that an API. It's more of a workflow, right? And there's certain issues with trying to just say, well, you put this text. It's not an API that you can make requests from and then get responses. I think of an API as something you interact with, right? Not just submit files to. But as to what you're saying, Josh, I think there's an issue currently with Kubernetes as an infrastructure system being used and having the API become the common point to be all platform things. Like what they're trying to do, what's the orchestrator, the universal orchestrator that came out? Yeah. It just, I think that, and it's tough to make APIs that cross these kinds of boundaries, but at some point we're going to have to do it. And it's easier if Kubernetes is the universal interface to all of the cloud resources, right? And then you're just orchestrating, Kubernetes APIs. But I don't know that using the actual Kubernetes API is the right way to interact with, platform elements.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a debate we have at work a lot, which is around like, oh, Kubernetes will be dead in 10 years. You hear that a lot. And people that make that point will point at like serverless and things like that. And it's like, well, if you look at the vendors that provide serverless, it's like, well, what is that built on top of? And so it's like Kubernetes may be very different 10 years from now, but the API will still be there, right? I don't know if that helps your point, Josh, but that's kind of what it made me think of.
I think we're dancing around that.
I think I would just say, sorry, just because it's a direct on that, sorry, Marsh, is I would
That's
say
okay.
that's where I think the different implementations is really powerful. Because if somebody wants to take this JSON and have it submitted to the Kubernetes API, or have it submitted to an API server, or have it submitted to a SaaS product, like that's what I think is really powerful about a common set of fields that have that are like your post request options that have validation around them. These are required fields, these are optional fields, whatever, and then you can figure out where you want that request to go to. And then that I would love to nullify that conversation on should it be to directly to the Kubernetes API or to something else, and just allow API like Kubernetes to orchestrate it. Because I do think we're going to continue to abstract, and today it might be Kubernetes, and in 10 years it might be something else, or in a year it might be something else. I don't know, but yeah. Sorry.
To me, it comes down to the question of APIs is what are your developers going to be most familiar with? If they're familiar already with the Kubernetes style of APIs, then thinking about your platform API in the context of that makes sense. But how are teams building APIs for their own internal services that have nothing to do with Kubernetes? What is the API style of your organization that's going to cause the efficiencies that you need internally? And does that mean that you should be thinking about a layer on top of the Kubernetes API when you're approaching the platform problem? So to me, this is simply like we talk about product as platform, platform as product, but this comes up over and over again with APIs as products, right? How do you make this consistency that invites, leverages the cognitive leverage so that the similarities make it easier to understand how you're going to interact with. If everyone is familiar with how the platform works, then they're going to be familiar with the styles that conform to that. So it's layers and layers.
Sounds like an opportunity for some of the standards, Marsh, that are coming out of your group to apply to the specs that Dave is creating, like the naming standards and stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just, and so that's the API enhancement proposals that's building on top of Google's AIPs, API improvement proposals. It's still early, but a lot of that comes from companies like Google looking to align with tools like Terraform that are going to be resource oriented. Like how do you make those things map? I mean, so it's interesting. It's early. If you're interested in that, it's a CNCF. What is it? Nurturing stage. So it's early.
No, we're just trying to nurture here in this group, but it's not officially anything yet. But
it's not officially. It's what is it? A proposal then? It's
yeah. We have a proposal for a working group, and we value your work. We just don't have it.
Yeah, I don't know where it goes, by the way. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
You should come tomorrow. And we're getting close to the end here, but Marsh, Apicurio registry is coming to the tag meeting.
Oh yes, I should come to that. I don't have that on my calendar. I'll find that. Thank you.
Yeah, if anyone is interested in that, we want to talk about APIs in the working group a little bit more as part of that too. Hey, Abby.
But by the way, this is why I'm here in platforms, is because I think it's really fascinating the intersection and collisions you get when you think about the API standards in your organization and platforms, and how platforms support those journeys, and what it means to have consistency across those different layers. Like that's really interesting to me. And so if anyone who wants to talk more about that outside of the limited hour time we get here, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second to figure out, Dave, with like a concrete ask. Like you shared some really good points of where you see this project going. I think this is a fantastic pool of humans that love to get involved with things. A lot of people are technologists and very well could be fantastic contributors to that. So thank you for sharing it. That being said, where the group focuses most of its collaboration time is more around the conversations and the theory and the writing the visions for things. And I didn't catch any actionable items that you had on that side of things. Maybe I'd zoned out or something and I missed it, but I wonder, we are trying to capture kind of projects of work and people are able to lead those. And so maybe we can collaborate on what it might look like to have a more formal ongoing conversation around this stuff with people from this group, if that's helpful to you. Basically, I just want to say, I haven't heard anything. I've heard that the actionable thing is to help participate in an open source GitHub repo if you want to write code. I haven't heard anything outside of that. If you have any other asks, it would be good to share them so that we could get people able to contribute.
Yeah, so I mean, the bundle spec is 100% kind of philosophical, right? In like, how do we create some kind of universal package manager for infrastructure and applications that can talk to each other, right? And so I think this group is great for helping refine that spec if they're interested. I think like figure out what that could even mean, right? Because maybe it's not this, but I think it's an abstraction that's missing in platform engineering and hasn't yet been formalized. So I'd love contributions on just figuring out like what that should look like and how we can kind of, you know, solve that problem.
It's awesome that you're starting that, right? That because that, like, we've been talking, like, you know, about like Knative duck types and things. Like, we've been talking about this for a while. So the fact that there's a little bit of a initiative here, yeah, if we can start to put some, like, I'm thinking like promises in Kratix
Yeah,
or
it's very
cross-play,
similar. Yeah.
you know, compositions. We start creating the specs in MassDriver, but we can start once we have a little bit of momentum, we can start applying them.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so Dave, why don't you shoot a message? My suggestion to you would be to shoot a message into the platforms working group channel in CNCF with that clarity of both the call to action that you had on your slides, as well as, you know, the spec ask and that kind of stuff. And maybe take a vote on if people would want to engage in a more kind of focused conversation around this. And maybe there's a appetite for a separate channel that focuses on this spec that would truly bring it to like kind of a community engagement, like high feedback loop kind of thing. It sounds to me like it has a momentum. It is not yet, or maybe never will be, something that we want owned by the platform working group, but it's absolutely the type of thing that I know I'm very interested in, and I suspect lots of people in this group are very interested in. So I think this is the right pool of people to reach out to and find collaborators. So yeah, I think that's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I will definitely do that.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Abby and Dave. Thanks for bringing them in. The last couple things on our agenda, we just like to call, there's just a couple things to call out. One is there's still the pending blog post, which I need to go over that. I don't think Victor's not here today. And also the platforms glossary. There's a open issue for that. Marsh has been leading the work on that. So they're all in the notes if you want to jump over there and take a look at them. And otherwise, I think we are at time.
I would
think accomplished our
Sorry,
goals for-
with the 1 minute left, Josh, I was gonna say the only other thing, it's not open work anymore, but it's now available. There has been an update now to the how to contribute part of the Tag App Delivery website, and there's been a blog post specifically around the platforms working group and things. There's a broken GitHub template that is in a PR to improve. So if you click through and you're like, what are you talking about? There's a template. It's coming soon. But the concepts are there, and I know there's a lot of really awesome new faces here today. So if you read that and you get a blank face and are confused, that is what we want to hear, because we are writing it for new joiners, and if it's not effective and useful, we want to hear that. So please do, either if you're comfortable, please write it directly into the platforms working group or working group platforms Slack channel, and if you're less comfortable, or open a PR. If you're less comfortable, please reach out to me directly, and I'm more than happy to try and update that and make it more effective. So welcome.
Thank you for your work on that, Abby. It's good stuff.
Yeah, no stress.
All right. So welcome again to 2024, and we'll see you on Slack, everybody. Thanks for your feedback.
You
Have
will.
a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you, guys.